conveyor when it had exploded.
Female worker was knocked off her feet, suffered a concussion.
Investigators say it could be the work of a serial bomber. Ahead, how do you catch somebody who's attacking at random? I'll ask an FBI veteran about the steps investigators are taking right now. That's all ahead in this hour of Shepard Smith reporting. We begin with President Trump's call to the Kremlin. I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shepard Smith. President Trump congratulating Russian President Vladimir Putin on winning re-election and saying the two leaders would probably meet soon. Then the president got called out by one of the top Republicans in the Senate. Arizona's John McCain, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said in a statement, quoting, "An American president does not lead the free world by congratulating dictators on winning sham elections. And by doing so with Vladimir Putin, President Trump insulted every Russian citizen who was denied the right to vote in a free and fair election to determine their country's future." But the White House defended the move, saying it's important for the U.S. to talk with Russia.
We disagree with the fact that we shouldn't have conversations with Russia. There are important topics that we should be able to discuss, and that is why the president's going to continue to have that dialogue. At the same time, we've been very clear in the actions that we've taken that we're going to be tough on Russia, particularly when it comes to areas that we feel where they've stepped out of place. We've placed tough sanctions on Russia and a number of other things where we have shown exactly what our position is.
Senator McCain is not the only Republican criticizing the call to Putin. We'll have more on that in a moment. Analysts say the results of the Russian presidential contest was never in doubt because it's Russia. Reporters asking whether the White House believes the Russian election was free and fair. The response? We don't get to tell other countries what to do. The chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live for us at the White House. John.
Good afternoon to you, Trace. You know what you heard Sarah Huckabee Sanders say there in the sound that you played, very similar to what the Norwegian Prime Minister said when she was here, and that there is a border between Norway and Russia, and while they're not happy about some of the things they're doing, they have to have a relationship because they do share a border, and similarly, the United States believes it has to have a relationship with Russia as well. The announcement that the president made the phone call to Vladimir Putin, the congratulatory phone call, came as he was meeting in the Oval Office with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. There you see them meeting in the cabinet room there over a working lunch. The president calling Putin to congratulate him on cementing another 6 years in power. They also talked, as you mentioned, about a meeting soon. If the two of them were to meet, there's nothing in terms of conferences like the G20 or APEC or ASEAN that would put them in the same city at the same time until late November. So if the president were to meet with Putin soon, it would likely have to be some sort of visit, either Putin coming here to visit the president at the White House or potentially the president going to Russia to meet with Putin there. The president, during the phone call, said that the two talked about North Korea, they talked about Syria, they talked about the arms race. But what they did not talk about was the fact that 13 Russians were indicted by Robert Mueller's team for meddling in the U.S. election, and the fact that Britain and the United States are pointing fingers at Russia for that nerve agent attack against that former Russian spy in the UK. Listen here.
Neither the White House readout of that phone call with Putin nor the Kremlin's readout says anything about election meddling. Did the president not raise the issue of Russian election meddling in that phone call?
I don't believe it came up on this specific call, but it is something that we've spoken extensively about and continue to look at ways and steps forward to make sure it never happens again.
The recent poisoning in the United Kingdom come up?
I don't believe that was discussed in today's call.
And the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell just a few minutes ago giving the president kind of a bit of a rhetorical back of the hand, saying at the Ohio clock about the president's call to President Putin, it wouldn't have been high on my list. Trace?
Yeah, and what else did the White House say, John, about the Russian election?
Well, you know, the Russian election was so heavily weighted in Putin's favor that he won with 76% of the vote. Can you imagine an American president winning with 76% of the vote? But they didn't go much beyond that, despite the fact, as you pointed out at the top, that Senator John McCain said that this was a sham election. Listen to what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said about what the U.S. position on the Russian election was.
In terms of the election, there we're focused on our elections. We don't get to dictate how other countries operate. What we do know is that Putin has been elected in their country, and that's not something that we can dictate to them how they operate.
So perhaps you can't dictate how a country operates its elections, but your response to that certainly is modifiable. We'll see if the president is going to be tough on Putin. As Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, we'll get tough on Russia when appropriate, if and when the president and President Putin meet. No where or when just yet, Trace.
Yeah, and John, stand by. The White House says it's frustrating that the special counsel's investigation into Russian meddling and possible collusion is still happening. President Trump has called the whole thing a witch hunt, but the White House says it is cooperating and the president is not considering firing the special counsel. Let's get back to the chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. John.
One thing that we do know for a fact is that the president is expanding out his outside legal team. The most recent addition, the president hired Joe diGenova, who's the former U.S. prosecutor. He prosecuted Jonathan Pollard, the Israeli spy. He also helped in the prosecution of John Hinckley, who tried to assassinate President Reagan. diGenova also believes that there was a conspiracy at the highest levels of the FBI to exonerate Hillary Clinton of any wrongdoing in the email scandal, and if she did not win the election, then that cabal at the top levels of the FBI, according to diGenova, would try to frame President Trump on a false charge. That's an indication of where he thinks the Mueller investigation is going right now. Sources also confirmed to Fox News that the president's outside legal team reached out to the former Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who is considered to be a legal rock star, particularly in the Washington area, to find out if he might be available to join the team. But apparently the president's outside attorneys were told that Olson's firm thought that there were too many potential conflicts of interest for him to join the team. The president also lashing out repeatedly on Twitter about the Mueller investigation, calling it a witch hunt. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders again repeating today that there are no plans to fire Robert Mueller or do anything to interfere with the investigation. Listen here.
The president has been very clear about the fact that there was no collusion between his campaign and any other entity. However, to pretend like going through this absurd process for over a year would not bring frustration seems a little bit ridiculous. I don't think that any individual, including members of Congress, would like it if they had been accused of taking their seat in Congress by doing something nefarious when they hadn't, particularly if it went on for more than a year into their time in office. My guess is they would be more than anxious to push back and certainly would defend themselves.
And the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, also weighed in on Mueller, saying that he's not going anywhere, that the president doesn't have any plans to fire Mueller. And he had praise for Mueller, also saying, and the reason why he said this, Trace, was because there's a push to put some legislation to protect Robert Mueller into the omnibus spending bill. Mitch McConnell saying there's no need to do that because he's not going anywhere. Trace?
Not going anywhere. John Roberts, live for us in the White House. John, thank you. Let's bring in Caitlin Owen. She is a reporter for Axios. And Caitlin, very good to see you. I'm fascinated by this whole back and forth about the conversation President Trump had with President Putin. And what the White House is saying is they're trying to keep a dialogue open. And you have McConnell and you have John McCain saying, look, we're not saying anything about talking with Russia. You want to talk with Putin, that's fine. What we're saying is you shouldn't be congratulating President Putin for this sham election.
Right. You know, I think that's part of it is that it's, Russia doesn't have the same kind of free and fair elections that we have. But the other side of it is just think about the timing here. I mean, the administration a few days ago just put sanctions on Russia for 2016 election meddling. We had the poisoning of the ex-spy. I mean, none of that came up. And so to call Putin and congratulate him on his election win and then not mention those other things, I think that's kind of the other part of the equation here.
It is the other part of the equation, but when you don't mention that stuff, I mean, that's not what's going to be in a congratulatory call. You're not going to say, hey, what about the poisoning over there? What about the election, the 2016 election? That's probably not going to come up. But there's a point the White House have where you really do have to keep the dialogue going with Russia at this point in time.
Right. And I think it's kind of... Yeah, I think it's hard. It's a catch-22 of what do you do here? You know, do you call and congratulate this country where you have John McCain saying they have sham elections? You have to have Mitch McConnell saying he wouldn't have done it. That's not what he would have done. But also, this is a country that we're working on with nuclear negotiations. You know, Russia's a country that it can't be ignored. So I think it's a little bit of a tight spot here.
Were you surprised at all, Caitlin, about not many questions about Andrew McCabe? And we kind of build this as, hey, this is the first chance we get to hear from the White House after the firing of Andrew McCabe. Really not many questions about that, and only a few questions about the president going after Robert Mueller. Did that surprise you in the tone and the tenor in the White House briefing room?
You know, I think you hit the problem where there's been so much news over the past few days. It's kind of like, you know, there's a lot of topics to choose from. So on one hand, you know, it's a little surprising, yes, that Andrew McCabe didn't come up. On the other hand, you know, we've had a lot happen since then between this Russian phone call, the Mueller tweets. I mean, I think the Mueller tweets, they've been front and center on Capitol Hill this week. So I think it was kind of a natural progression that, you know, especially as Capitol Hill's negotiating the omnibus, and there's this question of whether or not they're going to add some kind of special counsel protections in there. You know, I think that's what's driving the conversation today and this week for the most part.
Yeah, it was interesting when the president said he was not only congratulating President Putin, but there's a chance they could meet very soon. And as John Roberts pointed out, it's not as if their schedules actually mesh. I mean, they're not going to be in the same place at the same time anytime soon.
Right, and I guess as you know, as Sarah Sanders said, there's no scheduled meeting right now. So I think, you know, sometimes it's one of those things where it's a little TBD. I mean, this could easily fall through. We've seen back and forth before, where the president says one thing and then it kind of gets walked back later. So I think we just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I wanted to finally get your kind of take on this whole, just breaking right now, is this ex-playmate now filing another lawsuit against the president saying, hey, look, we want this non-disclosure agreement thrown out. I want this thing off. This is the second time in the past, 2 weeks that we've had a lawsuit saying these people want to talk about what they allege to be affairs a few years ago.
Right. I mean, I think this is just another indication that this is not going away. This is salacious news, right? I mean, it's hush money about an affair in 2006 that's now, you know, these women are coming forward, they want to fight it. And, you know, it's just one punch after the other. The Stormy Daniels news hasn't gone away, and here's this other one. And I think it's just something to think about. I mean, there's no evidence of there being other cases like this, but if there is, this is a storyline that could drag on for a long time. And, I mean, no White House wants to be dealing with this.
No, very true. Caitlin Owens, good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you, too. Thank you.
Grandson had what appeared to be nails stuck in his legs. Watch.
My son heard it, which was about 100 yards away, and he ran up there, and both of them were kind of bleeding profusely, and he kind of tried to stop some of the bleeding on them, and then they called 911 real quick.
The grandfather says while his grandson is in pain, he is expected to be okay. Let's get to the chief correspondent, Jonathan Hunt. He's live for us in Austin with the latest. Jonathan, officers searching more possible sites in Austin right now?
They are, Trace. We are at the site of that tripwire explosion, but in what is a fast-moving investigation and a rapidly changing one. There are now 2 new major investigative sites here in Austin itself, both related to FedEx. First of all, at a FedEx distribution facility near the Austin airport, investigators have been examining all day what they described to us as a suspicious package. There is no word at this minute on whether that package does indeed contain any explosives, but there are large teams of bomb disposal experts and other officials on site there now. Secondly, investigators are also at a FedEx store in the Sunset Valley suburb of Austin. That is the store from which they believe the package that ultimately exploded last night at a bigger FedEx facility outside of San Antonio was sent. So this is a complex story, as I say, a rapidly changing one. But the bottom line, Trace, is that there have now been 5 explosions in total, 4 of them here in Austin, and then the 5th one last night at the very large FedEx facility outside of San Antonio, Trace.
And Jonathan, what about the search for a suspect?
Well, it is increasingly urgent and increasingly desperate. Clearly, this incident here where I'm standing, the tripwire explosion, took it to a whole new level in the eyes of the officials who are investigating this, because a tripwire bomb is even more sophisticated, they say, than the package bombs that we were initially dealing with. So they want to track down whoever has been carrying out these package bombings around Austin, and now the one that exploded outside of San Antonio very quickly. And officials say they are bringing in everybody who can possibly help them in the search for whomever may be behind all this. Listen here.
We have agents from across the country. We have our national response team here. We got canine explosive detection canines here. We have intel research specialists. We're working hand in hand with our FBI partners, state and local partners. We've been working round the clock. Again, the public safety is our #1 priority.
And everyone, Trace, wants them to find that someone very quickly indeed. Trace?
Jonathan Hunt live for us in Austin. Jonathan, thank you. And up next, we'll talk to a former FBI special agent who says he thinks the serial bomber has something to say. But if he has something to say, why doesn't he say it? Why have there been no messages? No calls, no conversations at all with investigators. So how investigators bribery and how to entrap politicians. Earlier, Cambridge Analytica claimed the video was edited and that it didn't accurately represent the conversations that took place. It's, of course, the latest problem for the company, which is facing criticism over reports it pulled millions of Facebook users' information without their consent. William Lajeunesse is following the story here in Los Angeles. William.
Let's start with Facebook, anyways. The core of their business is targeted advertising. The question is, can they make money and still protect users' privacy? Now, that is what they're trying to do is head off government regulation.